BeamNG has changed their Aero physics yet again as of 0.39.3. And before I could even look at those changes, another hotfix was pushed for the game, possibly tweaking them even more. So in this video, I will be revalidating all of the tests I'd run in my last video, as well as running some new tests to try and compare the in-game numbers to real life as accurately as possible. So without further ado, let's go look at the results. To start with, let's compare the throttle position values in Johnson Valley between game versions 0.39.2 and 0.39.4. We can see that with cruise control enabled at 100 km an hour and without any draft, the baseline throttle position is a consistent 27 to 28% between both game versions. But things begin to change once we get behind a truck. While drafting one truck in 39.4, throttle pedal input went down to 21 to 22% compared to just 14% in 0.39.2, showing that the draft effect has been significantly reduced in the latest game version. Adding a truck behind me, and the throttle pedal input drops by another 2-ish%, which is actually pretty consistent with the previous test results. Though interestingly, taking the front truck away so that there's only the rear truck drafting me, and throttle pedal input increases up to 26 to 27%, which is only about 1% less than having no truck drafting me at all. And this is considerably more than the 23% pedal input as seen in 39.2. Side drafting effectiveness also seems to have been reduced, as with one truck side drafting me, throttle pedal input sits around 30%, which is roughly 1 to 2% lower than where it sat before. After adding a second side drafting truck, the pedal value increased by 1 additional %. That being said, I cannot directly compare the two versions here, as the positions of the trucks are different. Though because the effectiveness of everything else has been decreased, it is safe to say that this effect may have been reduced as well. So all of the drafting effects have been lowered considerably across the board, and this is also noticeable in fuel economy testing too. With my Covette cruising at 90 km an hour, I once again verified the baseline numbers in the hotfix, achieving the exact same fuel economy that I did before the update. Though once I was behind the truck, the numbers changed dramatically. In the newest game version, while tailgating a truck, my fuel economy went from 54 miles per gallon up to 63, which on its own does seem like a large improvement, though that is compared to the 76 miles per gallon that I had gotten earlier. Still, on paper, 54 to 63 miles per gallon does look pretty good, but that is actually as small of an improvement as it could have possibly been. Let me explain. The fuel economy app that I use for testing is only able to record fuel consumption down to the hundredth of a liter, and I had only driven 1 mile in the test, using just 0.07 of a liter without any draft. In the previous update, with draft, that was reduced down to 0.05 of a liter, but in the latest version, it was 0.06. And because the early test results were definitive enough on their own, I did not end up running a longer test, meaning that within the constraints of getting a new like-for-like test result now, the updated drafting physics have been reduced so much that these new numbers are now within margin of error. But moving away from the drafting effects for now, let's take a look at how the wake splash effects were changed. I've recreated every single test I'd run in 39.2, so let's fly right through them. The 200 km an hour rally car pass shows that the race flags do flap like before, however they are no longer knocked down, nor do they flap quite as hard. The 400 km an hour delineator test also reacts proportionally, showing the same effect as the previous game version, just toned down slightly. Moving right on to the 500 km an hour dump truck driving between the brick walls, and that's a little disappointing. Unlike in the earlier versions, the walls are no longer knocked down by a large vehicle, and in fact, they are barely even affected at all. Now that being said, there is a chance that these new Aero strength levels might be a little bit more realistic. So, my friends and I tested exactly that. To start with, back when version 0.39 first dropped, Zack, Max, Grant, and I all went racing in the Ford Crown Victorias at Daytona International Speedway. And if you are wanting to watch all of that recent footage, you can do so here. But breaking it down to just the numbers, without the draft, our Crown Victorias topped out at 137 miles per hour, and with the draft, they went all the way up to 154 miles per hour, or about a 13% increase in speed. Now, if we compare that to Cletus McFarland, who did the exact same thing, but in real life, they too saw a 13% increase in speed, even if their top speeds were a bit lower than ours. Though again, this was all before the hotfix. In the newest game version, the few of us tried testing again, and found that the new draft was often so weak that it was hard to tell if it was doing anything at all. While I was bump drafting Max, his top speed on the back stretch increased by just 1 mile per hour, and he was actually slowing me down by not accelerating proportionally. And because of that, we found out it was actually faster to just play leapfrog using the draft instead of bump drafting, which is the exact opposite of what we had found with the previous game version. Though, to try and remove any and all variables, Zack decided to try driving both the lead car and the drafting car at the exact same time, using a wheel to control the front car and a controller to drive the rear. He was able to do this via the in-game local multi-seat feature, thus negating any multiplayer ping issues. And after giving the cars their best possible chance, Zack was only able to achieve a drafting top speed of 145 miles per hour, which is a 6% increase in top speed compared to no draft at all. To rule out the fact that it was maybe just one car, we tested another vehicle, this time a 2023 Gen 7 NASCAR in the default speedway trim. Now before we get to the numbers, one thing that is very important to keep in mind is that for some reason, NASCAR almost always tends to record average lap speed instead of the absolute top speed, making the stock cars look much slower on paper than they actually are. Another thing to keep in mind is the fact that we are using the same configuration between qualifying runs and practice runs, whereas real NASCARs have some slight tuning adjustments to maximize short window performance for qualifying runs, compared to long-term performance in the race trims. Now, that difference is not quite as big as it used to be, but it is still an important distinction to make. With that in mind, Zack got the fastest solo qualifying lap with a time of 48.633, or 185.06 miles per hour. Comparing that to the 2022 season results, which is what this mod is based on, that puts Zack several seconds ahead of everyone else in the 2022 Daytona 500 qualifying results. And just to reiterate, this is without draft, in a non-qualifying spec car that also interestingly has weirdly low tire pressures, possibly slowing it down even more. To test that against the practice speeds, Zack and I tested the NASCARs in multiplayer, and to try to give them the best possible chance, Zack used his wheel, and I used my Steam Deck. With some preliminary testing, we found that these cars were fast enough that bumping the lead car was quicker than contactless drafting, unlike the Crown Victorias. So, we practiced doing that for several laps, and at the end of it all, our best time was a time of 47.627. Or an average speed of 188.96 miles per hour, which is an increase of a little under 3%. Comparing that time to the real cars, and we go from being significantly faster than everyone in qualifying, to not even remotely competitive in practice. The real NASCARs saw a difference of just under a 6% increase in speed between qualifying and practice. The thing that is the most interesting about all of this, though, is the fact that our drafting speed increase being roughly half that of the real cars is actually very consistent with our Crown Victoria testing. So at least in the tests that we have done here, the effectiveness of the new in-game Aero effects have been significantly reduced, possibly even a bit below the point of realistic strength. Though before anyone gets too up in arms, as we have just seen with the last few hotfixes, these effects may very well be adjusted again in the future, so do just keep that in mind. But, until then, I want to thank you guys for watching, as well as my channel and Patreon members for being there. This has been Akimbo, and I am signing off.